Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and today I want to discuss the question: how come most of Starfleet personnel seem to be humans with so few aliens among them? On almost every single ship we ever see in Starfleet, humans seem to be the majority. If Starfleet is the main space force of the United Federation of Planets, which was said to be made up of over 100 member worlds, meaning they have over 100 species who are members of the Federation. So if that is the case, shouldn't we see a lot more different aliens serving in Starfleet? So how can we explain this? Now, of course, the real life reason is that they simply didn't want to have to dress up as many extras in alien makeup in every single episode, so it simply was easier and cheaper to have most of the crew be humans with just the occasional aliens walking by once in a while. So that's the real life explanation, but I will be talking about in-universe theories to try to explain all of this. This is all just for fun discussion. And I think we can easily explain this in a lot of ways that will make sense. First of all, Starfleet was an Earth organization which existed long before the Federation existed. And so when Earth was on its own, it already started building the Starfleet in order to explore distant space. It was also stated in a lot of episodes that humans are more curious than many other aliens. Many other aliens were said to be perfectly content to stay on their own planet and were not as motivated to go and explore distant space. So that can also be a factor in why so many humans want to join Starfleet and to explore the galaxy, because it was said to be a human trait. And we know that Earth built the Starfleet before it even became a part of the Federation. So because Starfleet is an Earth organization, it started on Earth, and presumably even when the Federation was formed, it still operates mostly from Earth. We know that the Starfleet headquarters are on Earth. We know that most of its shipyards are on Mars. That's where all the new ships will get developed. And so it's still a very human-centric organization. And also, we can argue there are a lot of other types of fleets in the Federation. It's not the only Space Force. It did kind of look that way, especially in Deep Space Nine, when Starfleet was seen to be as if it's the only force that defends the Federation, as if that's the Federation Navy and there are no other types of ships. But I can argue that there are many other fleets in the Federation, and maybe they were not as well equipped to deal with the Dominion, and that's why we didn't really see them on the front lines. Maybe other types of ships were focused on defending the different areas of the Federation, so they were more focused on defense and not offense, while Starfleet was doing most of the offense, maybe because they had the best engines. They could get to the front line more quickly, so that's why Starfleet became in charge of the front lines in the war, but other fleets of the Federation were doing other things that we just didn't get to see. And it was mentioned in some episodes that, the Vulcans are defending the Vulcan sector and so on. So presumably there are many different types of ships which are not Starfleet design, which we just don't get to see that much. And the shows probably didn't want to confuse us by showing us too many different kinds of ships. So whenever we see the saucer-shaped ships, we know that's the Federation, that's Starfleet, but it doesn't mean that's the only Space Force. And so if Starfleet was a primarily Earth organization and it's operating in the proximity of Earth, that can explain why most of their crew are humans, because that's simply easier to recruit more humans in the area of space in which you are operating. And sometimes they say the Federation is over 8,000 light years across, so presumably there are other parts of Starfleet or other fleets of the Federation in other areas, and they recruit people from those areas in which they live. It also makes sense that the people who volunteer to go on these starships would prefer to be stationed closer to their own planet, so that they can visit their own planet, their families and friends more easily. And so someone from a 8,000 light years distance wouldn't want to join the Starfleet that is in Earth's proximity, while humans would want to serve on ships closer to Earth. And so even though some starships were said to be sent on long-range missions, sometimes for years away from Earth, it's not every ship that gets sent that far, and so most ships probably remain in the proximity of the Federation. And since the Federation is so big, it would make sense that people in a more distant corner of the Federation would be serving on their own ships. And it also can make sense logistically, because different aliens require different environments. Some might need different air pressure, different temperature, different gravity different light levels, and so because of that, some aliens might want to serve on their own ships or with similar aliens that have similar conditions, and not every alien would want to serve together with humans, and so humans require a certain environmental conditions, and so it's simpler to put all the humans on the same ships and different aliens put them on different ships, and that can explain why we see mostly humans, because we follow a crew that is mostly made up of humans that comes from Earth, and that's why we see so few aliens, because most aliens would prefer to serve with their own kind, maybe even for cultural reasons and also of course for physical reasons. It might be possible to separate different parts of every ship into different environments, but it's a lot more problematic that way, because then you would have to adjust the pressure every time you want to open a door from one part of the ship to another, and different gravity on different decks. It might be too difficult logistically, and so it would make sense for different aliens to be serving on different ships with different environments. And it was mentioned in one episode of Deep Space Nine that there was a Starfleet ship, which is a completely Starfleet design, looks like any other Starfleet ship, but its crew is made up entirely of Vulcans. And it was implied in that episode that maybe it's because those Vulcans are kind of racist, they're xenophobic, they don't like humans, they prefer to be with their own kind, because of those reasons, and so they kind of try to make the Vulcans look bad, basically, so that we'll be rooting for our crew against the Vulcan crew. But in reality, if this was all planned logistically, it would actually make sense, because, you know, the Vulcans come from a desert planet, so presumably they prefer a hotter environment, maybe stronger gravity. So it would make sense for them to want to serve on ships which are better suited for their physiology, and the same with many other aliens. It would be too difficult logistically to simply mix up all the aliens together into a single ship, and then everyone will have to have different conditions around him at all time. It will be too problematic, and we did see a few aliens like that, like those benzites who had to have their own breathing apparatus, because presumably the air on the Enterprise lacked some substance that they needed, and so he constantly had to walk around with that device that gives it to him. And I think they said those were new aliens in Starfleet, and so presumably if it's a new alien, then you cannot devote a whole ship to those aliens if there are so few of them, and so it makes sense for that unique alien to have to serve with humans, because there are not enough of them to have their own ship, and they do want to learn from each other, they do want to cooperate, and so it would make sense in some situations to have a mixed crew, but in a lot of situations it would actually make more sense to have different ships for different aliens, or at least put together the aliens who are more similar to each other physiologically, so that you wouldn't have as many problems logistically with all the environment stuff. So have a bunch of aliens working together who require similar conditions, while a different group of aliens who all need more similar conditions to each other can serve on their own ships. And you can also put their ships closer to their own areas of space where they come from, and then they can visit their planet easier when they want to, and so it would make sense to have some kind of separation or segregation, you can say, instead of artificially trying to blend everyone together just for the sake of being blended together. And so I think it makes sense for humans to be mostly with other humans, and Vulcans to be mostly with other Vulcans, and Andorians being mostly with other Andorians, because, you know, Andorians need much colder environment. So instead of having crew members walking around in EV suits all the time, it makes more sense to put them in their own ship, and maybe that's why we see so little Andorians on the Enterprise. And so the Enterprise, because it's the flagship, it has to be in closer contact with the headquarters of Starfleet, which are on Earth, and so it would make sense to recruit more humans to the flagship, because it will be closer to Earth most of the time, and so maybe that's why we always get to see that the Enterprise have more humans than other aliens. And also we can argue that maybe a lot of aliens simply look human but actually are not fully human. We do know that a lot of aliens have totally human faces. There was that guy who bumped into Wesley one time, and we saw that he has webbed fingers, but he looks totally human otherwise, but he's not a human. And so we can argue that actually a lot of aliens we see on the Enterprise just look human from a distance, but actually are not human or not fully human. We know that a lot of aliens can interbreed with humans, and so maybe a lot of the crew members that we assume are humans are not even humans at all, or not completely humans, and actually have all kinds of differences in other parts of their body and just not on their faces. And so we can explain that a lot of the extras we see are actually not all humans at all, and there are a lot more aliens than we realize. And so I would argue that we can say that Starfleet is not some kind of all-human organization, and there are a bunch of ships that are completely run by aliens, simply for practical, physiological, logistical concerns, and even culturally, and even just being closer to your own home planet would make sense. And because we follow the adventures of the flagships usually, that can explain why Starfleet wanted it to be closer to the core of the Federation, closer to Earth, and therefore it makes sense to recruit people from Earth and its vicinity into the flagship, and that can explain why most of the crews we see are mostly human. We can also argue that maybe humans simply breed faster than other species, maybe the other members of the Federation are not as prolific, adopted a slower breeding rate, maybe they didn't want their planets to become overcrowded, and yet Earth tends to be kind of overcrowded, and maybe that's why Earth has so many colonies. We hear about hundreds of different colonies that Earth has, specific human colonies, I mean. And even the ones on the Cardassian border, the ones who became the Maquis, seem to be made up mostly of humans, and so maybe humans are simply more inclined to settle on other planets. Maybe it's because Earth is overcrowded, and so Earth encourages humans to go out and settle on distant planets, and maybe because there are so many humans on so many colonies, the human population in the Federation is proportionally much bigger than of the other species, and so I guess it's possible, even though that would make humans kind of the dominant force of the Federation, which is an idea I don't really like. I much prefer the enlightened idea that the Federation is a true union of many different types of aliens. I think that's a beautiful idea, and so I would wish they would have shown more of that. I would wish they would show us more aliens working together and not just mostly humans on every ship that we see in all the shows, but I realize it's mostly been done because of the limitations of budget and not wanting to put so many extras in alien makeup. And I kind of like the fact that on Deep Space Nine we did see a bigger variety of aliens. So much of the crew are made of all kinds of different aliens, and I do think that made that show kind of more interesting in many ways, that we have so many different aliens. And I think the reason they picked Bajor as that planet that is near the station that they constantly have to deal with, maybe because the Bajorans are so similar to humans, it requires just a little bit of makeup on their noses to make them the aliens, and maybe that's why they chose the Bajorans to be the resident aliens of the show, because it simply would be cheaper to make them the aliens, because you have a bunch of extras that you can easily turn into Bajorans with such small makeup. So that's probably why they picked the Bajorans, which was kind of boring early on in that show, when they constantly had to deal with Bajoran politics and all of that, and the Bajorans are kind of a boring species. So I think that show became much better later on when they started playing with the whole galaxy, with the whole quadrant, and all the major species that were set up in previous shows. And so I think Deep Space Nine improved later on, but I think one of the reasons it's one of the best Star Trek shows is because the main cast, the main crew, was so rich. They had so much variety of characters and so many different aliens as the characters in the show, and that was so much fun and so much more fitting of the idea of the Galactic Federation, of many different species working together, compared to the other shows in which most of the cast was often just humans with just the occasional exotic alien. So it's a little bit of a problem in Star Trek overall, but I do think it can be easily explained as I just did, and so we can explain it with different ships having different types of aliens simply for logistical reasons, for being closer to your own home planet and being in the same physical conditions on the ship, and maybe also because humans breed like rabbits and they reproduce much faster than other species in the Federation, and they colonize space a lot more, with thousands of Earth colonies all over the place. Maybe they started that also even before the Federation existed. Earth already started colonizing so many different planets, which later all became part of the Federation as well, and the shows that we usually see take place in the area around Earth, and that's why most of the crew on those ships seem to be made up of humans, and also presumably a lot of aliens simply look exactly like humans from afar, and it makes it look as if most of the ship is made of humans, but it's not necessarily the case. And we did hear about other Starfleet ships which are manned completely by aliens, and so I think it makes sense, and I wish we would have seen more of that, maybe even to show some conflicts between different species of the Federation. So I think it has a lot of potential to play with, and I hope maybe in future Star Trek shows we will see some of that. And if I was writing a Star Trek show, I would even split Starfleet from the military of the Federation. I would put a different organization as the military of the Federation that is designed to protect the Federation, and I would keep Starfleet as just an organization devoted to exploring the galaxy. Maybe in some situations they would also join forces with the military to defend the Federation. That would also be fun, and maybe you can show the military as being kind of more aggressive and less goody-goody as Starfleet, and you can have all kinds of conflicts with that. And so I would have done that. I would have added a lot more complexity to the Federation and show different arms of the Federation, different organizations, and not so simplistic as just one organization being like the navy of the whole Federation, and that's it, which creates all these logical problems of how come most of it seems to be made up of humans. Where are all the aliens? If this is the navy of the Federation, then where are all the other members of the Federation in this navy? And so I think the way they did it was kind of too simplistic, and it created all these logical questions, which we now have to come up with excuses to explain. But this is also a very fun thing to do, so I enjoyed it. Let me know what you think, and we can discuss it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, please subscribe, click the notification bell to see updates of new videos. Check out all my links in the description below, and I will see you all next time. Bye bye.